Wednesday, July 24th. This is the Water Quality Management Committee. We're coming to order. First item on the agenda is fairly straightforward. I distributed to everybody at the last meeting a letter that I prepared, transmitting our committee vote to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Health, and Zoning Board of Appeals, asking them to write a letter to the DEP. Does anybody have any edits or corrections to that letter?
Yes, minor ones. Development should be possessive at the end of the last sentence in the second paragraph, where it says development's contribution to nitrogen.
Possessive.
Yeah, just put apostrophe S. And I would, in the very middle of the approved motion, put in treatment, wastewater treatment system, but that's not critical. See, in the very middle of that fourth
Yeah,
line.
I don't want to touch that because we had a whole motion.
Yeah, I know that's been accepted, but it's not gonna change the substance, but.
And they are voting this possibly tomorrow at 5:30, so.
Oh, and select board,
DEA.
Steve, I forgot to tell you, select board is 2 words. And I wouldn't make those possessives up there, I would just say Town of Falmouth Select Board. But that's stylistic and not really substantial.
No problem. Done.
I move that we vote to accept it with those 2 changes.
I'll second.
Okay, motion been made and second. Any further comment? Hearing none, take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. All right. So if we get through all the other items at the same rate, we will be out of here by 5 o'clock. Okay. Steve, you're on. Discussion and recommendation. The
Okay,
Town
thanks.
Manager's Office and IA subsidies.
You've all received this 4-page draft. It obviously has my opinion in it. And what I propose is that we do this in 4 steps. The first, that if anyone has any corrections of any of the facts, so let's get those taken care of. Part 2, any problems with the reasoning. Part 3, any problems with the conclusions. And finally, at the end, the grammar and writing style. Does anyone have any issues? And of course, anybody can also say anything they want. Anybody have any problems with the facts?
I'm going to start down this end.
John?
I guess I was a bit concerned with the language around environmental justice and the assumption that you underline typically owned by wealthier citizens is closer to the waters that are impacted. And I'm not sure that's an accurate statement. It's partially correct, but even on the block I live on Shorewood, you go 1 block off the water and the home values go down dramatically. You go north, even on the waterfront, and the value of the home is much less than, let's say, the neighborhood's closer to the beach. So there's a lot of lower income, fixed income, elder people who own old properties there that I think would argue with this wealthier citizen statement. So
Good point. I think you're probably right.
Should I dive in? Is that?
I don't know if Jonathan's done or not.
I mean, that was my main correction I had. yeah.
Okay. No, but good insight there.
Steve, philosophically, your betterments paragraph. Sewers are not put in to make a house more livable. They're put in to make the community more livable. When you put in sewers, you're doing the same thing that you would be doing when you put in an IA or a UD or anything else. You're making, the major effects to make things better are off premises, they're not on premises. So I question, I mean, I know where you're going with that, but it doesn't make the property more livable. Unless it's failing and it's backing up into the basement.
I disagree with you. What the main reason is, you'd have to read the minds of people, but was it the The most recent one was at the new Silver Beach or the old Silver Beach? I've never,
New Silver Beach.
new Silver Beach.
Right.
Yards were being flooded, I believe, right? Amy could tell us.
But that was for health reasons.
Right.
That's
That was
right.
public health, not
But
nitrogen.
whose health was affected most if your sewer backs up, your septic backs up in your backyard is you. And my main point is, it saves you the hassle of taking care of your septic system. And it, in some cases, allows you to put on more bedrooms, and it requires less real estate on your property. And that in the case, as opposed, mainly in contrast to traditional IAs and even urine diversion, do absolutely nothing for the homeowner. They are purely altruistic. All right, so that asking people to pay for that is like asking Mother Teresa to pay the city of Calcutta or wherever it was for the privilege of running the Sisters of Charity. I mean, sorry, that's a stupid analogy, but I mean, a traditional IA or a UD does absolutely nothing for that homeowner over and above what it does for every citizen. It's
Maybe
just a-
this is, maybe this is,
cost burden.
maybe this is a little nuance on words. So if somebody gets connected to the sewer, they may have more options as to how they can utilize their property. Okay?
Absolutely, yes.
That may be that may be the point you're trying to make,
Yeah.
as opposed to the way you sort of stated it. Okay?
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Tom?
Yeah, no, that's been my,
You can, you get connected to the sewer, you can do some different things with your property.
Right.
Because you're no longer having to maintain the septic system and utilize real estate for the septic system.
I think historically, Steve is correct, that the reason for putting in sewers in Woods Hole and at New Silver Beach were the properties were becoming uninhabitable. The sewage that was bubbling out of the ground from overflowed systems was affecting public health, to John's point. But if that plant hadn't been built at New Silver and part of the Woods Hole connections, you wouldn't be able to use the properties, you wouldn't be able to sell them. They couldn't handle what the people were generating. So it was a direct benefit to them. This either gets done or your property is not usable anymore. It's zero value. In fact, you got a cost of cleaning up your mess. We then, let's move forward to Little Pond. And there's, most assuredly, it was a townwide clean up the estuary benefit that the whole town had some skin in the game, so to speak. Hence, the town paid, 30% of the lines in the streets. So I think it evolved from initially sewering due to unusable properties, and yes, a very distinct, direct public health hazard, to now we're into, call it more altruistic. We got to clean up the estuaries. We're under some state mandates. The game has changed from a need to protect an individual property to a town-wide benefit. So now that's that evolution. And yes, I think, to Steve Layton's point, the IAs don't improve the marketability of a property unless somebody is a really, I'm helping to save Falmouth estuary, so I want to do this, so I feel good about it. But it's a kind of a moral benefit rather than a financial or quality of life benefit. But that IA certainly helps the entire estuary to be protected. So we're in the evolution of why did we sewer and why are we looking at IAs, I think.
Well put.
yeah, I would just guess that when Woods Hole was sewered, there might have been maybe 5% of the properties that were at some sort of crisis stage. Right, but everybody had to do it in some wider, bigger area.
Right. Otherwise, you couldn't do it.
Right, well, that
You
too,
couldn't
the
just go in and
economics of it,
sewer
but-
6 or 10
but-
properties, however many there were, and none of the businesses would be viable without it. What are you gonna do in a restaurant if you can't?
To
So I
support,
just want to clarify a little thing. You sort of talked about New Silver Beach. So back when that whole process got started, the criteria was the depth of the groundwater. And so New Silver Beach, the Surf Drive area, coming back up a piece of Shore Street and Walker Street, and the Robbins Road area, and where is the little pump station down in Woods Hole?
Park Street, yeah.
Is it Park Street, over on the back side of that little pond? So those areas were all identified at that time as the depth to groundwater was not, groundwater was relatively high. And so therefore, the systems that were there either were not functioning well or were not getting any treatment on the septic systems. But having lived in New Silver Beach or had a piece of property there for a while, there wasn't a massive public health problem with things bubbling out. There were half a dozen or so homes that had to regularly pump until they got the system in, Steve. So I just wanted to clarify
Thank you.
that, okay?
And let me also support what Ed just said. I have seen multiple real estate ads over the years with the phrase "on-town sewer" as a selling feature in the
Yeah,
ad.
yeah. No, I
I've
agree.
never
It's a-
seen
it's a
one that
plus.
says, has traditional IA or UD. And of course, that's
Right.
because there aren't very many, but.
Yeah, I guess it was your choice of the word livable. It could make it property more valuable, but I'm not sure it makes it more livable.
Usable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I chime in?
Please do.
I think we have to think about the concept of a betterment in a watershed which we're treating with IAs differently than with the sewer. In the sewer, it's obvious that you have a collection system. The town contributes 30% to those projects, largely to pay for that collection system. There's obviously no collection system in a watershed where you're dealing with IAs. I would argue, to the contrary from what's been said, there is a real betterment to having an IA on your property. Just as one example, the lifetime of your soil absorption system will be extended dramatically by having an IA. You've cut down the BOD. Instead of getting 20 years, for example, from a standard soil absorption system, you might get many more. So I think we still need to think about the concept that putting an IA in is an absolute betterment to the property owner. His real estate property is going to be more valuable if we treat the groundwater so that it doesn't pollute our coastal ponds. The second thing I think
Does that apply to UDs as well? I mean, sir, do they, if you take just the urine out,
well,
but you still have a Title V, does it change your soil
I'm not
absorption?
going there at the moment. But the further point is that I think you can't think about something like IAs where you're talking about a betterment that's a percent of the cost to the homeowner. You've got to think about it as the town in a project like that is going to contribute something that is equal to each homeowner. In other words, if we provide the box that treats the thing, everybody gets the same box, and Joe Blow doesn't get $50,000 because his house is more expensive to deal with than the guy next to him. So I think if you put a system together where there's a difference between neighboring households on what they're bettered, it's a recipe for not getting anything passed in town meeting. So I think we need to think about these as providing something to the homeowners, and every homeowner gets the same thing. And the second part of that is that not only will they potentially be getting the box, they would be relieved of the management of that system. In other words, now every person who has an IA is responsible to contract out for maintenance and monitoring. If we had a responsible management entity and the town was contracting to have all of that done, that's a betterment to the property owner. And so I think that's the way we need to think about this.
I like that, that reaches my same conclusion B by a different route, which is very appealing.
Yeah, well, I agree pretty completely with what John just said. I think we go to the provider, supplier, manufacturer, whatever, and say in the next 2 years, we need X number of these, and we're gonna get a better deal on them, and there's gonna be uniformity. It's gonna be similar to the grinder pumps. You know, everybody has the same grinder pump. When there's a problem with one, hey, we've had that same problem 2 weeks ago with this one over here, we know how to fix it. I think there's a tremendous advantage. I know I'm talking out of turn here, but I think there's a tremendous advantage to uniformity. Uniformity in terms of financial benefit to the homeowner, uniformity in terms of the equipment that we've got, and we'll have some sort of time frame. In 2 years down the line, company XYZ comes up with something that does the same thing for 40% of the cost, we shift the contract to them.
Yeah, you bid it every couple of years.
Right, yeah, every couple of years, or project by project, you know, whatever area we're doing coming up.
John and Tom, you're suggesting that Steve, as he reworks this, needs to perhaps incorporate the concept of uniformity for the IAs,
Yep,
and that the town's participation may be not necessarily a direct subsidy to the homeowner, but a procurement and making it an
That's already
element
in it,
available.
that's conclusion B.
yeah, pretty much Steve's conclusion B, the hardware, I call it the
I'm just
hardware
trying to make
approach.
Sure that
Yeah.
that you're all articulating the
Yeah.
same thing. Okay.
But I also think the idea of a percentage doesn't work.
That's what conclusion B is,
I know.
not a percentage.
Right.
It's by the box.
Yep.
Ed,
You know, it's a twist.
you got 15 minutes.
I'll take every one of them.
I bet you
No,
will.
no, I won't. You know, I've made a lot of my points over the past several meetings on this, so I won't belabor them, but, you know, I think we have to look at the other advantages that are available to the homeowners, whether it's a sewer, where you've got a state tax credit, which is now $18,000, up to a max of 60% of the cost of your connection to a sewer system, or now putting in an IA, spread out over 4 years. So you need, you know, an income level that gives you a tax liability of $4,000 a year or less, but some liability to take any advantage of it. But to get the maximum advantage, you need to be able to, you've got to pay more than $4,000 in taxes a year, which requires a pretty healthy income level. But that's a subsidy from the Commonwealth rather than from the town of Falmouth. I think if we look at starting to buy, recommending that the town is going to buy all the boxes. Right now, they're like $22,000 for the best performing system. That can come down with economies of scale and a mass procurement, but that's the number. So let's say it came down to 20 or to even 15 times the number of houses. I think it's going to be an extremely hard sell to the town to suddenly be paying several $1 million a year as this program is implemented. It's a very significant number. I think, you know, we're doing this exercise for a couple of reasons, one of which has some immediacy, which is the assistant town manager and the program they're trying to put together for urine diversion for this fall town meeting. But the larger one is more this committee's issue, which is our IA policy recommendation. Policy recommendation. We only recommend, we have no enforcement or anything else. We are purely an advisory board to the selectmen, the select board. So we have to consider that. But, you know, I think we got to look at those numbers and say, you know, philosophically, are we all in favor of any subsidy at all? The only other towns that do that right now are on the Vineyard, and they've got a small budget relative to the size of the task to do it. Will they continue that subsidy when that fund is gone? Or how will they manage that? You know, they've got 1,500 homes, I believe, in Tisbury alone that are under an IA mandate. They don't have enough money in that subsidy kitty to subsidize them. Mashpee offers no subsidy for their IA mandated areas. They also have no betterments for their sewers. Zero. The town pays for everything, and the entire town is funding the entire system. Homeowners are eligible for that connection tax credit from the state, that $18,000 maximum, 4 years, 60% of what it costs them to run the pipe on their property. But that's it. So we're looking at a very large, unprecedented fund that we're looking to sell to this town. I think it's gonna be a very hard sell.
So, if I can, so when we put the sewers in, it's a 70-30 split right now, right? 70% of the homeowner, 30% of the town. We need to put 2 IAs in for every 1 sewer
To get the same
to get the same
nitrogen
nitrogen
reduction.
effect. So if you have an area where you're gonna say, there's 400 homes that have to put an IA in, if we had a way to put a sewer in, we'd only have to sewer 200 of those homes. And those homeowners would be on the 70-30 split, right? So that sort of has always been my starting point, which is, we're gonna turn around and tell a whole group of people, you have to put an IA in. So there is some level of figuring the fairness factor out. I think working on the standardization is a strong element of that, okay? And yes, we're gonna need to get to the selectmen, we're gonna have to sit down with the finance director, we're gonna have to figure out, you know, how we get there. Either that, or we have to figure out how to get a lot more money to build sewers and build connecting pipes and everything else, because we can't not do it.
No.
We don't have the option of not doing it.
Do we have a rough idea, or how soon will we have a rough idea of how many IAs will be required?
Well, we're gonna get 2 more.
Two more tonight.
We're gonna do 2 more tonight, so we're marching along.
So you're saying not till October?
Yeah.
Can't somebody
Yeah.
guess?
No, I don't like guessing.
Well, some of it depends on what the discharge availability and capacity is with an outfall, whether you can change some of those IA
We're gonna stick
areas.
with the area that we intended to sewer.
Right.
Up to now, we're not gonna expand the sewer area yet.
Right.
We're gonna build geo boundaries for each one of the watersheds, which will define, at least as a minimum, because it's at the 10 milligrams, the homes that might have to have an IA or a place that we think a PRB might work. Now, who pays for the PRB, you know? There's a lot of levels to this. But thousands, I've always said it's thousands, it's not hundreds, it's thousands of people are gonna have to put IAs in, okay? We already are, or what, we're already a few hundred.
Yeah, I think 600 between the 3, between McGansett, Fiddlers, and Rands.
Yeah, so it's a big number, Steve.
So if it's 2,000, and if it's 10,000 for quantity purchased boxes, that's 20 million.
Yeah, and if you went to go put sewers in, what would the town's cost be?
You tell me.
Yeah, it's,
It would be more than that.
yeah, it's at least in the same range, if not
Yeah,
more,
yeah.
okay?
The other thing to think about, can I speak, Steve, or whatever?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay,
I didn't cut you off, so that means you're on.
yeah, that's good. I'll throw things back at you if you throw things at me. We could also take a hybrid approach, agree on the hardware approach for that uniformity of standard, and then we have a betterment applied to the hardware expense. Right, that's a flip side of paying, the town paying for the betterment off premises. In this case, the town would pay a betterment for on premises stuff. So, I mean, it's not like we're gonna ask the town perhaps to pay for all of these IA systems. Again, we could have a hybrid thing where the town, we agree that we wanna take the hardware approach, but then the town would pay some fraction of that. We already have this 30-70 thing, which Falmouth seems to have used for a very, very long time. Anyway, just an idea.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's some parallel conversations going on. One is the whole concept of if people have to put IAs in, are they on their own or not? And I
Right.
think the general consensus is they're not on their own,
Right,
okay?
I agree with
The
that.
details of that are still
Yep,
under the artful craftsmanship of Steve Layton's pen,
yep.
okay? But, you know, as we do these geo boundaries, we're gonna be able to then start having a go to the selectmen and talk to how we got to this minimum area that will require IAs or something. My good friend from the British Beer Company asked if we'd evaluated sewering up to, Joint Base Cape Cod for like McGanson or whatever, which, that would probably fall out when we get around to actually doing the watershed permits, looking at a couple of those things back and forth. But at least this sets the stage for those people that are most likely to be affected. It will have to do something, whether the town then decides to build a lot more sewers and ship the wastewater someplace else or whatever. That can all happen, but in the meantime, there's a lot of, I met with Falmouth Housing Authority this week, because they're developing a parcel over in Coit, and their question was, are we gonna develop this parcel? And then in 5 years, you're gonna tell us to put an IA system in, because if that's true, we should probably put it in now, unless we're gonna be in the sewer area. They're not in the sewer area, we haven't done the geo boundary, but just based upon what I've seen at the first 4 out the gate, there's sort of no doubt they're in the geo boundary for the parcel, and how close it sits to things. So, they're in fact gonna change their budget and put an IA system in now, so that they don't sell this property off to somebody, as an affordable house. You get this affordable house, and 4 years later, you're suddenly being told, dig up your whole property and, spend thousands and thousands of dollars again. They're building that into their budget.
So Steve, that's a good point about why this in fact does make the property better. If these are gonna be mandated changes, and you can say, I'm already conforming, that makes your property more
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah, yeah,
As opposed to having the burden of having to pay those costs later.
right.
But one,
No, we could talk offline, but I don't think your logic follows. I mean, there are all sorts of things that are mandated, the fire code and the building code and so on. And
They all add to the value of your property in terms of the marketability.
Yeah, but-
If I have
not
fireproof house, it's
robbing
worth
banks
more.
and committing murder adds to the value of your life.
I'm just saying, from an economic perspective, there's,
let's move on.
but, can I, because I haven't said anything yet, so.
No, you have the
It's your turn.
floor. You have the floor.
So I think that I agree with a lot of what John said, and your basic premise of fairness, that the whole town benefits from improved water quality in these estuaries, and some portion of that cost should go to the whole town, not just to the people who happen to live within a certain area that therefore they're required to sewer, or put in IAs. The whole town benefits from this. And so it just got, but I also agree with you, the details are hard to pin down right now, because we don't really know what the costs would be. But I do like this hardware approach of, let's make it, maybe there's 2 or 3 options that people could choose from, and we end up contracting with 2 or 3 providers, but.
Go ahead.
So that's your option B, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I guess I'm saying I favor that concept.
Do I also hear that most people agree that we leave the landscaping?
Yeah, landscaping.
That's the homeowner.
That's the
Stay out of
homeowner,
that.
because,
Yep.
first of all, it could be so variable from
Right.
home to home, and then what do people, do you just put down mulch, or do you want lots of flowers?
Hardscapes.
Yeah.
I've heard from the board. The audience want to chime in? Amy?
Amy Lowell, wastewater superintendent. I had expressed support at the last meeting for the concept of the town bidding and procuring potentially the IA infrastructure, some portion of the IA infrastructure. And I think there are advantages to that. I should also say, though, a couple of things that I know about the grinder pump procurement. Number one, the grinder pump procurement made a lot of sense because you want all of the pumps pumping into the same force main to be the same type of pump with the same head requirements and all that. So And that factor is not here with the IA systems. They don't have to work together. They're not connected to the same main. It also was extraordinarily effortful and complicated to manage the provision of those pumps to all the property owners. I'm sure there were other options and other ways that it could be handled. So it may be premature to endorse that specific way of doing it. It seems to me, it sounds like you're agreeing that a percentage of the cost to the homeowner doesn't make sense, and that instead it should be a flat amount that is equal among all the homeowners. So you could say it should be a flat amount equal to all of the homeowners. One option under that option is providing the equipment or the boxes through town procurement. But, when the town provided the grinder pumps, we had storage. We ordered them in batches. We provided storage. The DPW provided storage, and we had to have an operator move them on a forklift, put them on the truck for each property owner. We had a lot of tracking, and it was a lot of effort went into that by town staff, and so there are simpler ways to do it that would be less burdensome to the town. Certainly, giving people money, a flat amount of money, is much simpler for the town, and that's a consideration. But one other just thing that I keep thinking about when you're talking about this is that I think you're talking without thinking about them, specifically just about single-family homeowners. During the LPSA project, there was no real discussion, or that point was not made during the discussion. We talked about grinder pump provisions and grinder pump reimbursements and all that. So I interpreted that discussion later to mean that what the town meant was just providing pumps to single-family homeowners. The town wasn't intending to provide pumps to businesses or to multifamily housing. So you might want to make that clarification, or at least say whether you agree with what we did in the last project, because all of the discussion was about single-family homeowners. There are other properties out there, and they're very different. It ends up being a very different consideration. So I think that that you might want to clarify that you're just talking about single-family homes, or maybe not. Those are my 2 points.
Can I ask you a question, Amy? Thank you. Can you elaborate more on the various problems? The storage and handling seems to me can be handled by, whether you want to use the word drop shipping or vouchers, or, it can be in the abstract world without giving the homeowner cash. There are loads of structures where you make an agreement with the vendor, and then when the time comes, the vendor delivers one item to such and such an address. Were there other kinds of problems?
I wouldn't even call them problems. It's administrative, and it was a process that ultimately cost effort and money, time and money. So I don't think we need to resolve. I don't think it's not reasonable to resolve now what that process would be, but it would be complex for the town to try to provide that infrastructure to each property owner. I'm sure there are ways around it, but the grinder pumps are not manufactured or supplied locally, so we were getting them shipped to the DPW garage in bulk and then handing them out one by one. That saves a lot of effort and time for the homeowners. It would be harder to do for giant concrete tanks, for example. So I'm sure there are other options. I'm not saying it's unsolvable, but it's something to consider, that providing $5,000 or whatever to each property owner who provides an inspection certificate saying that they completed this effort is a lot less complicated and accomplishes the same thing.
Yeah, I think the counterpoint to that, Amy, is that what we've been seeing is that when it's just left up to the homeowner, the prices that are showing up are wildly all over the place.
Yep.
And I agree that the logistics, I mean, Kyle spent half of his time or better keeping track of grinder pumps as they arrived and went out. So this is a staffing issue on your side.
Yep.
But contracting with, putting it out to vendors and say, you have to perform at this level and we'll buy 100 a year or 200 a year. And as he says, work out a drop ship arrangement and certificates of titles for ownership on third-party property or everything
Right.
else. That can all be done.
Yes.
I think the sense of this board is it's worthwhile at this level. We haven't taken any votes or anything, but it seems like it's worthwhile to promote that that's how the town thinks it wants to go. Then we can start engaging with some of these vendors and find out where they think their pricing would go if they were assured of a certain quantity or volume of business. Whether they would say, oh, well, if I can make 200 of these a year, hell, I can cut my price by 30% or whatever. I think it's worthwhile to push that, and if that blows up, then we turn around and say to the property owners, we tried, but it doesn't work, you're on your own.
Yep.
But you still have to put it in.
The other thing, Steve, is even among the approved systems, there's a broad range of performance. And
Absolutely.
we know that certain of these systems are better performing. So if we could just make sure that we,
There would be
kind of
performance-
hone in on those.
There would be performance limits in the bid.
Yes.
Steve, can I make a comment? This is exactly making the case for why the town should consider contracting to a responsible management entity.
Yeah.
In other words, if the county is going
They're
to,
coming in at the next meeting to make another presentation.
right, so you just say to the responsible management entity, okay, put out a competitive bid for the box, you deal with it, get it installed, monitor it, report to DEP, and we'll do it.
We're
And,
done.
I think that's the model which we're all trying to head for.
Right. One of the town's respected builders now is at the podium.
Hi, Doug Brown, Select Board. So I would caution against trying to get too far involved on people's private property. Septic design is site-specific. Each one has to be engineered. Some sites are topographically challenging, that's gonna be much more expensive. If you only give them a few choices and say, this is what you have to use, there's gonna be liability issues, there's gonna be lawsuits against the town for forcing them into a bad situation, and they're gonna blame us for all their problems. I would suggest you just stay with the 70-30 split, say you have to achieve a certain level of performance, and if you want a list of contractors that you're aware of, you can give it to them, let their engineers figure it out, because some people are gonna be able to just keep their tank and add a box, modify the field. You don't know what the engineer is gonna come up with for each site. So I would not get involved with trying to run the whole program. I would just give them a financial incentive and let them do the best for themselves.
But that's, Doug, exactly what we're suggesting, is that the homeowner is responsible for everything but the box. The Board of Health in the Home Rule regs now mandates that any engineer who designs a Title V system must design a spot and with proper elevation so that a box can be dropped in the future.
Right.
So all of that peripheral stuff is always going to be on the homeowner. What I'm trying to sell is that if they're going to have to treat to a certain standard, and we can contract out or by competitive bids provide the box that does that, it seems to me and manage that box, that's the simplest and most effective way for us to get there.
I guess if you feel that you're confident that that same box will work on every site.
So on any individual site, the existing components of the Title V system may or may not be reusable.
Right.
That portion of that is up to the homeowners to figure the engineering out. But there's always an intermediate component that will knock the nitrogen down. Okay? Septic tanks come in standard sizes. People could put them this way, they could put them this way, they could put them on diagonals, however they want to do that. This is similar to saying, you know, Title V says you have to have a minimum 1,500 gallon septic tank. For one bedroom, you could get by with a 300 gallon tank, but you have to buy a 1,500 gallon tank.
But many existing are 1,000 in Falmouth. the
I
smaller
understand that.
houses.
So, but we're sort of saying, this upgrade you're gonna have to do, the component that's gonna knock the nitrogen down, we're gonna try to get the best one we can and standardize it at the best price and make it available to you. Not tell them how to redo the leaching field or redo the, you know, reset the septic tank. You know,
guess so.
they may need a pump. You know, if their hydraulics are such and the other components are good, they may want to get over and then pump over to the leach bed.
And what if they find a different system that they feel is better for them? They can say no thanks to the one that the town is buying?
If they
We could
find
look-
such a thing, they
we
should
could-
immediately join this committee,
No,
because
no, no, no,
we've
no,
all
no,
looked.
no, 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 no,
and
no,
they're
no,
not-
no,
they're
he's
not
bringing up a
there.
good point.
Doug, I think
So that's, as we work our way into things, there have to be, there's waiver provisions of the Board of Health. You know, you sat around listening to entertainment regulations, you know. You gotta leave people an opportunity, if for whatever reason they don't like the box that we're gonna make available to them at a good price, and they wanna do something else, then the response has to be, that's great. Anybody else that gets this box is getting basically a $4,000 or $5,000 subsidy. You wanna buy another system, and it meets all the performance criteria, take that subsidy, but I think we can work our way to that if we have to.
All right, sounds good, thanks.
I don't like the idea of buying the boxes, period. I think the cumbersome nature of that type of program adds unnecessary complication and expense to the entire process. Yes, you may get some economy of scale by bulk buying the concrete block. I don't think that's a good route to go. I think the cleanest minimum proposal would be purely a financial subsidy, no matter, and you decide your system. The point was made by some of the speakers from the public. There's liability potential if the system isn't working properly. Oh, that's the system you made me put in. The big cost variability, site to site for an IA, is not the box, it's the install. There was a wide range of costs, proposals, bids from contractors to do the same thing on the same site, and they were all over the place. It's the install that drives the cost, not the box. And the total cost of a system right now is somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 average. To say, look, we're gonna use that as our basis. You homeowner decide when, why, and how you're gonna do this, what system. If it meets our minimum criteria for performance, thou shalt be eligible for the town's subsidy up to a maximum, and let's just say it's $10,000. 30% of the cost is reimbursable by the town upon submission.
30% of the cost up to a maximum.
Up to a maximum, up to that $10,000. If you pay whatever, we'll do 30% up to a maximum of 10,000, period, end of subsidy. Clean, neat, it's an accounting thing, it's, you know, established procedures, it's not logistical nightmare of storage, whether it's vendor up at the base or somewhere at the contractor, they manufacture these and then they bring them out as needed. I think you'd create an administrative and logistical nightmare for little benefit. In fact, you're probably gonna increase the cost to the town dramatically, because all of a sudden now, town procurement, you get into, you know, prevailing area union wage scales and all that other stuff. leave the
I
damn
would-
thing
I
alone
would
and go with a
argue
pure,
abs-
simple financial way.
I would argue absolutely the opposite. If we're interested in making the concept of a responsible management entity work, what we're saying is we're not going to allow the individual homeowner to manage his own IA system, because we're responsible to DEP that those IAs operate at a level that we're going to be able to report to DEP that we've hit their standards. So we take away, you can't have the individual homeowner running things. And to make a responsible management entity effective, you can't have 16 different systems out there. You've got to have some sort of a standardization that makes the contractor that you're making responsible for running that watershed able to do that in an economical way. And I just don't see how you can do it by leaving too much to the home.
Well, you can,
There's too many approved systems, and many of them just don't really do the job.
No, there are only two that meet the kind of milligrams per liter that we're looking
They're
for.
not approved.
Well, but this won't happen until they are approved.
I mean, in the
I'm
case,
letting it-
in the
I'm
case of
validating
the
this
project
statement.
that Steve was just talking about, the Housing Authority was considering two systems. And they were gonna go, I don't know where they ended up, but they were gonna go with one that was 14 milligrams and change, if you go look at the Mass TC. And when I talked to them, I said, I think you should go with this other system, I'm not gonna name them, which gets 4.57 median performance. That's what we want to do. We want to have the best systems out there, and we want to manage them, just as John said, in a way that ensures that they're functioning as close as possible to what we would get if we had sewered the whole area. It's the water quality that we're trying to improve, so we do need to exert some control. At the same time, you're absolutely right, you know, they're all, the actual installs are different and so forth, so the cost is gonna vary from home to home. But providing some subsidy, and I think it's very hard to define the exact economics of how that works without a little more information about what it really costs, you know, how much would the hardware come down if there was bidding? Would we get anywhere in that range of 30-70 with just a hardware subsidy, et cetera? But, you know, this fairness thing is still hovering over there, sort of over it all.
I'm going to let other people talk. I am going to say that I want to wrap this discussion up by half past, okay? To give chance for the other two watersheds, which we need to get through today, okay? I'm just sensing that there's another rewrite on this one, Steve,
Fair enough.
okay?
Yes.
And maybe perhaps,
We may have to wait till after the presentation of the next meeting. Is that the fellow from STC who spoke before?
yeah, you see the correspondence back and forth. I know you reached back to him.
He's coming on the 14th.
Coming on the 14th, okay. Yeah, so he's gonna talk to what.
What
he's-
John is talking about.
He's gonna be more specific though about, hopefully he's got more costs, like, you know, this is what we think it's gonna be, not, because we heard before the concept of it. This time he's to come back to talk more on a more proposal basis of what they would do and what they would expect their costs are.
I'm the one that told him he had to do that. Remember, I said,
No,
are you a
didn't.
vendor or a regulator?
You're not the only person here.
Right.
I'm clarifying why this person's coming back, okay?
No, I mean, we made it clear to him that he admitted he's a vendor.
All right, Jonathan had his hand up.
All I was gonna say is, are you now talking about the Barnstable SUP, that presentation? Because they were gonna act as an RME that you're talking about.
They said they could, so we've said,
Get
tell us.
lower costs, provide oversight, uniformity. It seems like engaging them, which you already have, is critical to this discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can I throw one more light lob into the discussion? Are we gonna have it open-ended so that if somebody else in another, when we start doing one area, if someone else wants that same deal for their property outside the watershed we're dealing, is it gonna be open to them to participate?
There's no benefit to the town. No benefit to the town.
No, but,
So, for instance, in New Silver Beach, there were people across the road which would have loved to
Yeah,
hook
oh,
up to
yeah,
the
I
sewer.
know.
We said, basta, no way. So, you're dealing, at town meeting, you're gonna draw a line around a
Right.
geo boundary. Those are the people that are going to be dealt with, and, I mean, if somebody outside the boundary wants to put in an IA, fine, put it in.
But part of it goes, when the boundary gets made, it's gonna be a directive to the people inside the boundary, they must do this.
right,
If somebody outside the boundary wants to do something,
How about it?
have at it.
Yeah.
But the folks that are,
okay, no,
are
I'm just
are not
throwing
being
it
given a
out,
choice.
that's something to think about.
Yep, yep.
One great unknown in this,
You jumped in, he had his, he
well, I
had,
had my hand up before.
oh, I'm
so,
sorry,
okay,
you're
go
on the
ahead.
wrong side of me.
Yeah, I'm always on the wrong side of you.
That was a softball.
Just quick, I agree with John, and I just wanted to point out to the objection from Amy and someone else about liability and maintenance and all that. A lot of that has to be solved by a very well-written contract with whoever the vendor is. And which could be done by us or by this SUP, you know.
We are.
The contract to the SUP has to be well written.
Well written,
Yes,
too.
and then that's
Yes.
their problem with, between them and the contract.
As we look at the scope and the cost of this concept, we're making an assumption that when we submit those watershed management plans with the geo-boundary concept, and the state looks at it, they may say, oh, absolutely not. That geo-boundary is the whole watershed, because that's now where the state mandate is, should we not be doing watershed management plans? So we're making an assumption that this narrow percentage of the watershed will be acceptable to the state as, okay, if you just mandate IAs there, you're all set, it's good enough. And we're also assuming that, 20, 30 years from now, that action will clean up the estuary. And if it does not, the state will say, you gotta go further.
I'm gonna challenge your assumption. If you go to the one watershed permit that is issued right now for Pleasant Bay, they very specifically define the areas that things will have to happen in, not the entire watershed. And that's what the state approved.
They set up some geo-boundaries
They didn't call them
conceptually.
geo-boundaries, but they said, this is what we're gonna have to do around Pleasant Bay. Okay, they didn't say, the entire Pleasant Bay watershed's gonna have to do this. They set very specific projects and boundaries for what they wanna do, okay?
The point is to
And
meet
the way the whole thing's written about the watershed permits and everything, it says the watershed permits is a chance for the community to come in and say, what's their solution gonna be, as opposed to this blanket thing set out in the regulations that everything in the watershed has to do what it has to do, so.
But those are
Because all-
not arbitrary boundaries. Those boundaries are based on a loading estimate and an amount of loading
Yeah, I think
reduction required.
It'd be hard for the DEP at this point, on the path that we're on, as we can issue geo-boundaries to the Board of Health before we do the watershed permits, okay? And the DEP can say, we want you to do more than the geo-boundaries, then we have to go back and modify it, okay? We don't have to wait to do watershed permits to do geo-boundaries, okay? Sorry,
And it's really not any different than setting your sewer service area,
Correct.
right? You're
Same idea.
saying, this is how much we have to sewer to achieve that, the load reduction.
Yep.
So,
all right. Are we ready to move on?
I just requested everyone send me emails with everything they want me to remember. Because my handwriting is hard to read, and
Kristen's taking notes.
I think it's reasonable, Steve's request, I'm guilty of this myself. Read this closely, make comments on it, scan it or whatever, and send it to Steve.
you have sent us this as a document, right? So, yeah, so we can play with it.
Thank you, Steve, for all the hard work. getting us to this spot. Right. Next up,
Okay.
Quistit Harbor.
And I want to send copies to Doug and Amy and get their opinions too. It's a public document now, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not the easiest thing to get out of the town website, so.
No, by all means, have at it.
That's a very sticky website, Ed.
You know, any insights you can offer as to what went on around West Falmouth Harbor, you know, issues that came up or concerns, that'd be much appreciated.
Okay. Kristen Rathjen, Science Wares. So the first one up tonight is Quistit Harbor. This is one of the smallest watersheds in town and should be one of the simplest ones. So this is the entirety of the watershed outlined on the map. 173 total parcels within the watershed. 122 of those are single family. Since the finalization of the MEP in 2013, there are 6 parcels that are listed as year built. So that again is if it was vacant, developable land that now has buildings on it. Buzzards Bay Coalition Health Index for the watershed for both sub-embayments, the inner harbors, 84%, which is good, and outer Quistit Harbor is 89%, which is also good. So same sources as we've been using for these planning scenarios. So looking at the MEP said that there is no nitrogen that needs to be removed from the outer harbor and 267 kilograms from the inner harbor for their present number. Like Megantic, Quistit Harbor had been meeting its target threshold concentration at the Sentinel Station for the last 9 years until Buzzards Bay Coalition sampled in 2023, and it was just over the threshold limit. So we can't say it's still meeting. The Cape Cod Commission multivariate planning tool, their database numbers, which has updated water use numbers from up until 2016, they estimate that there's 579 kilograms that need to be removed, 200 in the outer harbor and about 350 in the inner harbor. So this is the image from the MVP tool. The inner harbor is this upper portion up here, and the outer harbor is down here. So this is what they're saying the loading is right now, is how those numbers come about. This is the snapshot of the Sentinel Station for Inner Quistit Harbor. You can see this is overall Bay Health Index since the early 1990s, as well as the total nitrogen numbers. So you can see there's not a lot of variability going on in those data. The water use numbers, MEP versus MVP, you can see the MVP numbers are higher. So for doing the calculations, looking at the MEP numbers, again, that makes it relatable back into the model for how much nitrogen load could be reduced based on what the model said was being loaded into the estuary. So about 4 kilograms per single family residence. So that would be the equivalent of upgrading 66 single family residents in the watershed to IAs at 10 milligrams or less. If you look at the Cape Cod Commission's numbers, the 597, you get 144 systems that would need to be upgraded in that watershed. Remember, there's only 173 parcels in there. So because Quistit had been meeting its threshold nitrogen concentration, again, looking at the actual real-world data that's out there, there's 2 options. You do nothing because it's a healthy system, or you do something to help maintain and protect that status. So the proposal for this is basically the IA boundary being the direct abutters to that system as the starting point. Again, to protect the current state of that estuary. If you look at the actual water use numbers for these parcels, it would be about 220 kilograms of the present loading. That's the MVP number. So that basically reiterates what I said. You either do nothing because you're meeting it, or if you look at the direct abutters to ensure the continued protection. This, again, does not consider growth potential, build-out potential. The proposed district does not actually reach either the MEP or MVP targets for present loads. There's 15 parcels that have not been developed in that watershed. So again, considerations for growth. Looking at the MEP water use numbers for the single-family residents in that district, it's 93 kilograms, plus the one existing IA that we assume is 19, and there's a commercial IA. It's about 40% of the MEP target. If you look at the MVP water use, you're in the same ballpark, about 40% of that target. Considering the fertilizer stormwater credits, it's about 50 kilograms, and the potential for shellfish that Marine and Environmental Services determined was about another 100 kilograms. The proposed IA district in Quistit is about 25% of the parcels in the watershed.
Would you mind just staying with MEP and MVPR for people at home?
So the MEP is the Massachusetts Estuaries Project Report, and that is what the total maximum daily load targets are based off of. And that is the TMDL document is the regulatory document that the town needs to achieve. The MVP is an updated database that the county, the Cape Cod Commission, has put together to take into consideration different loading factors and slightly more recent data.
You're taking questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say, one thing that struck me is that this is a very small watershed. You know, that, some of these other ones we looked at, they stretch way back upland and whatnot. This is a fairly concentrated watershed, so. Steve?
When you're talking about build-out, I would assume you're assuming that any new construction would have to put in an IA.
That's for the recommendation of you guys and the select
But I mean,
board.
for the calculations as to whether it would meet, I mean, it
If you
seems
want
crazy
to
not to is
keep
make the new
the
construction put
implementation
in.
efforts that you've done valid, it should. Any future build-out should have considerations
And-
for.
Can you point out where the proposed aquaculture would be? Because at one time, it was right where you're, no, there. It was in that bite in the middle. on
It
the east,
used-
Right there.
The original one, when Sia had worked on it, was down here. I do not recall what the most recent survey, I would have to look.
Because that particular area has been discussed many times, and when you have those temperature, so-called temperature graphs, showing where there's the clean water and the not-so-clean water, it shows that that location
Right.
does absolutely no good.
Right.
And if you put it up in the head of the harbor, in the north, that's full of moorings, and all owned by people with an unlimited budget for lawyers.
I think it was in this area what Chuck's group determined. I think it's a small amount. It's not even an acre if it's only 98 kilograms.
I think you would get huge pushback anywhere in that harbor. And especially given that, how many more houses would you have to put a good IA on so that you wouldn't have to count on shellfish at all?
25? If shellfish is 100 and IAs are removing about 4, 25. But because we're not necessarily reaching this target, that's the adaptive management. We're looking at the data of what's going on in the actual surface waters right now. If we were in a situation where this harbor was severely impaired, yes, you need to hit that target and you need to hit it clearly. That's why I'm not considering shellfish. That's the last bullet if you want to think about it. And they're not on the map because I know how you feel about them.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure, good. Fine.
I don't think the financial resources of folks abutting any of our watershed should be a determinant factor in our decision-making.
Fair enough.
Let me do the board first, okay?
But you agree that you wouldn't want to put the shellfish in an area where they don't do any good?
I may not be entirely on board with your assessment that they don't do any good. They might not do much, but they do some good, okay? So I'm not gonna bite on that, that I agree they don't
But then you
do
have to
any
put,
good.
you have to multiply by a coefficient reflecting the less than perfection that they've achieved.
I've always said that shellfish are the necktie you put on after you put on your good suit and taking care of everything else. Doesn't do a lot, but it polishes you off at the end.
Mr. Oysters has a nice ring to it.
Huh?
Mr. Oyster has a nice ring to it.
Yes, it's good. I'm gonna start at the far end here.
I think all of these analyses have been excellent.
Good.
I really don't have,
Yeah.
I mean, how it translates into specific, yeah, I think this is a great start.
Yeah, we need to start,
It's a great start.
we need to put something in and work from there. Ed?
I think, Steve, you made a point about parcels that can be built on in the watershed would be required, new construction would be required to do an IA. Are you talking only if they're in the geo boundary or if they're anywhere in the watershed?
In the geo boundary.
Okay.
I mean, I'm saying it makes no sense to me to enlarge the geo boundary to allow new construction to not do anything. Right, to force existing properties that otherwise wouldn't have to put an IA, to put one in, to cancel out the possibility that someone might build a new house with no IA at all.
So you're only talking specifically a new house within the geo boundary, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I was looking for, because it sounded like you were talking
No,
about
no,
anywhere in the
no.
watershed.
You were talking.
No, I am talking anywhere in the watershed, you're right, sorry.
So that's a trigger that we're gonna have to wrestle with at some point.
Yes, because there, we talked about, well, you can get a subsidy
Yes,
if we're
that's a good
mandating you
point.
in the geo boundary. Oh, we're also mandating you, that's outside the boundary, for new construction, but we're not gonna give you a subsidy. This thing
No,
gets.
I would give them the subsidy.
Okay,
But
but
right, that's
you
a
understand
it's a
where I'm
very
going
valid
with this.
point. Yes, I
We're
do.
becoming so
Yeah.
complex in this, I think, we should have a mandate right now, any new construction puts in an IA, if you're in the watershed, period, no subsidy at all. That's the time to do it, and the cost is minimal, but that's beyond what we're looking at the scope of now. But I think we gotta keep this in mind as we move forward with the discussion on subsidies. Now, my other question in this is, you mentioned something about stormwater credit, let's say, stormwater management system credit. Is that something that exists, or we think we're gonna do, and how and when, and?
It's in the MEP.
So the town has to follow the MS4 permits, the NEPDs, the National Pollution Elimination Discharge System. It's been strongly rumored that as long as the municipality is following that, because it's so hard to quantify stormwater benefits, that you get a 25% reduction on the stormwater loading, and that's all broken out in the MEP. So there are these potential credits that are there.
But to really earn that, let's say, the town should have an active program of installing structures that manage that stormwater appropriately.
If that's what their permit says, and that's what the requirements are, and that's DPW engineering kind of oversees the stormwater side of things.
But I think it's one of those things that probably isn't really being done.
It is.
But-
It is
I'll
being
get that.
done.
The whole stormwater thing is as equally complex as trying to set geo boundaries, okay?
Absolutely, I understand that.
But, for example, in the Quistit area, there's a couple of very small drains way deep inside there. I don't think there's a drainage system coming down Quistit, the road there. I don't recall ever seeing it. But now, for example, we put a grant application in back in December. we targeted one of the streets in Mara Vista, which has a drain that goes out at the bottom end, to try to take, and through the DPW, change that drainage system in a way that will achieve some of the levels of treatment that the SW4 permit would mandate for. So the town's got a list of where these all are. They've been looking at things and trying to figure out. We heard from our past board member, things that they were doing over at the boat ramp.
Yep,
So,
yeah. Yeah, you know,
it's taken a long time for people just to inventory what they have and then attempt to quantify through rainfall records how much stormwater is going out and what the loadings might be,
Right.
okay?
You know, looking at,
But it's as simple as cleaning the catch basins on a regular
Well,
basis.
you know, if there is such a thing, I know
They
of
clean
us,
them, they clean them all the time.
well.
Maybe there's more to be done, but they have a crew that cleans catch basins all the time.
And I,
Prioritized list where they were removing catch basins and putting in pollution control structures.
Yeah,
Right.
they've been putting in things that soak into the ground and whatnot,
yeah, you put in a whole new catch basin and pipe that
Yeah.
overflow to a leaching structure,
We
but
can-
you know.
We can
I'll-
always do more, but we're not doing nothing.
Right. Well, I think, you know, specifically when we're looking at these harbors or these bodies, and I'll just use poor little pond as an example where we just spent some significant millions to sewer it. There's, I know, a storm drain at one of the lowest points of street that goes to Little Pond, and it's a drain that is directly piped right into the pond.
There's
There is
several-
no,
There's several of them down there.
and,
And we applied for grant money to try to,
Yeah.
try a solution.
But that
And if that
continues-
solution works, we'll implement it on all the other ones.
right. You know, it's something that probably can be done quicker than some of the sewering, but it's a funding and a prioritizing of that need. But I was just trying to understand, if we mentioned it in our study, what are we really talking about, and what are we really doing about it? And that's my
So her answer
question.
was that we're presuming that the town does what they need to
That-
do over
that's going to
time
do it
under the
eventually.
SW4 permit.
Yes.
And that we then get a 25% credit if the town does what
Yeah.
they need to do. Did I have that right?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Can I ask a
Go.
question while we're on that? Just a quick one.
I'm gonna allow you to go to the podium, but Corin's had her hand up trying to get there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, no. Do you want to yield?
I will, I would like an opportunity, but I will yield.
You'll yield?
Just a
Okay.
quick question on an update that I haven't, not aware of what the status is. You guys were talking at one time about putting a 300-foot boundary from a geo-boundary from any water body.
Board of Health was talking that.
Oh, is that what it was?
Okay, so now we've got sort of a working relationship between the Board of Health and this board, letting them know that we're doing geo-boundaries to figure out whether 300 is a good number.
By the way, Mashpee does 1,000.
Mashpee does 1,000. Some of the, if you go back to one of the earlier ones, I think we're all of 1,000 feet, at least one of them, right?
I don't know.
Rams could,
Mashpee's 1,000, a couple others were 500.
yeah. So our approach has been, rather than just arbitrarily so many feet from a water body, figuring out how many parcels we would have to convert to IAs to achieve what we need. So it's gonna be, the distance will be different for every water body.
Okay, thanks for interrupting. I mean, sorry for.
No, that's okay. I'm gonna,
One other point, if I can remake this point.
can I stop you?
Yes, of course you can, you're the chairman.
Go ahead.
Warren,
Yeah, so Doug, you know, I like that initial, when John suggested the 300-foot boundary, that sounded great, but then the more I thought about it, if you're in that boundary and you have a qualm, you know, you want to pick a fight about it and go to court, it's pretty hard to defend. Why is 300 feet? Why not 400 or 250? This approach is based on the loading, and there's supposedly science that backs up the need to reduce load by a certain amount. So I just think this approach is much stronger from that point of view.
I'm still working on it.
I'm gonna let Corin
Yes,
go next.
yes.
Probably should say that. Corin Peterson
I
from
think you get on TV if you go over there.
Do I have to?
She can be on TV over there too.
We'll make them pick. How about that? Okay, so very, very quickly, the slide before, you're based on the MEP target, you needed 66. This one.
Yes.
You're showing 42, 43.
Yep. So there were 23 single-family homes. So it's really hard with because I don't have the actual parcel information from the MEP, because that was so long ago. So I'm using the average water use per single-family residence in the watershed, because that's the majority of all the parcels. So accounting for what the MEP assigned for commercial, other development, industrial, is really hard to backtrack, to fit back into that model. So the breakdown here, there's 23 single-family, you have 2 multifamily, you have 7 other development in there. So it's the 93 that came out to plus these other parcel types in there to go back into the MEP calculation. Then that's also why I'm using the MVP numbers, because that's every parcel's water use updated. It's trying to compare.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So Corin, key point maybe, because you're questioning whether there should be more homes in there. We're working with, no, it's okay.
I just
We're
wanna know
working
to
with the
understand
10 milligrams per liter criteria, which doesn't yet have any approved systems that the state says that they're gonna, was what they wanna get to. So the current definition of geoboundaries, we're sort of certain that these folks will have to do this. We are going to look at it on an ongoing basis, and we may turn around to continue to add more parcels over time.
So the purpose of this geoboundary exercise, which I think is terrific, is sort of a baseline. If we were gonna file, we being the town of Falmouth, was going to file a watershed permit, and we were gonna meet our target with IA systems, it would look something like this.
I'm gonna take a slight twist on that. We don't have to file watershed permits to adopt geoboundaries. We just have to get geoboundaries and work with the Board of Health to do that. We could then be writing watershed permits, but we will put a certain group of people already on notice that they shall do this. So we don't have to wait 5 or 8 years to get our watershed permits all together and done.
I hear that, but the state is gonna wanna see a watershed permit for these estuaries.
And we will include this in it.
And this is going to be in it.
This will be part of it.
Could you consider a different alternative? You mentioned it before this evening, whether if you didn't do a geo-boundary with IA systems, could you do something else? If you
Sure.
decided to do a neighborhood cluster sewer system?
Yeah, I mean, we're not, yeah, if something's obvious, we'll surface it. I mean, one of the things that we've been doing is, as we do each one of these places, we've been targeting, I mean, you'll see this in the next one, places where a permeably reactive barrier may be relatively, big bang for the buck.
Right.
Okay? We have sort of taken off the table for some of these western estuaries, that expanding the sewer system to get them on, because we don't even yet have enough effluent capacity, as you well know, for even what we want a sewer for going down the South Coast estuaries, so.
Okay, so last comment, I just want to reiterate some of the things that I've heard is the coalition would definitely support and urges the town to require new construction in any of these TMDL watersheds to require IA systems. Because if you don't, you're negating the investment the town has made in requiring somebody with a Title V to upgrade to an IA system, and you let somebody come in the same watershed and do a Title V system, you've negated the investment. And so super, I just want to underscore that we really urge the Board of Health, this committee, to require that watershed-wide.
And also
I-
for
I-
substantial renovation.
You're not I don't disagree with your desire and statement. I'm trying to do this in a relatively methodical way, which is, after we have these geo-boundaries, then we're working with the Board of Health. But we may not, I doubt that we'll stay at just geo-boundaries. We're likely to build other triggers. If you're doing this, you have to put an IA in. But in addition, we're gonna start with, if you're inside this, you gotta do an IA. And then, in addition to that, if you're also doing this, or this, you'll have to do an IA.
Yeah,
Okay?
in the meantime, right, I support the process that the committee is going through, I just didn't want that point to not be underscored. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
If I could just add, I would say also substantial renovation, because there's more of that than new construction.
Anytime that there's something that requires an upgrade, yep. And again, I use the word triggers, after we get through the geo-boundary exercise, then we say, what else what other things are going to require an IA outside of the geo boundary?
There are no easy ones.
And I just want to emphasize that the reason that I didn't expand the geo boundary to get to that number to solve the math equation is because of the way the surface water data looks for Quistit. It's really hard to say, you guys, all you extra people have to do something, but the harbor's in really good shape. That will be a tough sell.
I'm gonna, I agree with
Unless it's a direct rebuttal.
direct, it's not a rebuttal, it's an agreement.
Okay.
So, on that point, I wanna, that's why new construction or substantial, those triggers are super important. You're right there, don't make it worse.
Yep. Steve, you've had your hand up for
Yeah,
the last 20 minutes.
2 words, neighborhood associations. There's a variety of them. Some, won't name any names, are incredibly zealous, others are non-existent. But we should have a policy on when they become involved. The downside of involving them early is it takes time and a lot of words. The downside of not involving them early is sort of obvious. And for instance, I would guess, I don't live in that area, but that a neighborhood association there would have a strong opinion one way or the other on whether they prefer oyster rafts or moorings, and whether they would trade off the oyster rafts versus additional IA requirements. That's all I want to say.
Okay, comment heard.
Well, I'm just gonna,
Tom wants to say something.
yeah, I'm just gonna suggest that the shellfish activities in Quistit Harbor are likely to be really small. I don't think there's gonna be any effort to make it of a intensity that's gonna have an effect and fit any of our models. It's just, it's not a great spot.
Bow tie instead of a necktie.
Maybe not even that. Maybe a sleeve garter.
Cufflink,
Cufflinks.
Yeah, so anyway, I wouldn't worry too much about any kind of proposals to do any consequential aquacultural activities in Quistit Harbor.
But my comment was broader, that we should have a policy for all the estuaries on when we involve the neighborhood association.
Oh, for sure. No, I agree
Not just
completely
on-
with that.
That's a separate discussion.
Yeah, we
Yes.
want to be open and ready to talk to anybody that has any interest in any of these.
All right, hold on. Jonathan?
I'm curious about the fertilizer credits being considered. There's a fairly sizable golf course in the watershed, and we know from the Pleasant Bay that that was a pretty big consideration. They went from granules to liquids targeted, and it made a big difference. There were some significant savings in the nitrogen per year that was released. Are we in a position to think about using that there?
So for Quistit, the majority of the golf course, the majority of the greens that are fertilized aren't actually in the watershed. When you look at it on a better map, for a lot of the watersheds where the majority of the golf course is within it, the MEP actually separated out that fertilizer load. So there's a golf course fertilizer load and a non-golf course fertilizer load.
Yep.
With Quistit, it's all lumped into one.
Right, so
And-
sorry for cutting off. So I'm gonna leapfrog, I'm gonna tie together. At some point, we're gonna need to, engage people in watershed by watershed to let them know what's coming. You make a valid point that when we engage the Quistit watershed component, we need to make sure the golf course gets involved in the discussion to ascertain how they're fertilizing the component that's in the watershed and what they can do to reduce, to still maintain their greens, but, we heard from at least one person along the way that if somebody knows what they're doing, they can fertilize but not over-fertilize. Okay, so we need to find out what they're doing, but I agree with you. We got a backbencher.
Matthew Hanley, Surfrider Foundation. Thank you for letting me speak. I do agree with what Karen from Buzzards Bay Coalition is saying, and really the new septic systems going in is the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, here in Falmouth. Those are going to make the biggest impact because we're not adding any nitrogen into the new into the the estuaries, especially in the areas that that are already in trouble. Buzzards Bay Coalition's been doing a great job with their IA system program in the West Falmouth watershed, and they've included the whole watershed. It's kind of like a roadmap for what Falmouth can do and should be doing. I wasn't here earlier and wasn't involved in the whole discussion about the vouchers for the town of Falmouth, but I do agree that, these properties, so I have a question. So these properties that you're identifying here, is the town of Falmouth saying at some point they're gonna mandate those properties to change over?
Yes.
And then we're gonna give them a grace period to change those
We
over?
haven't got to those details. but
Okay,
yes.
all right.
The exercise we're doing right now is, as a minimum, who's gonna have to put an IA in? Might be
Okay.
more, depend upon technology and a couple of other things, but this current geo-boundary are folks that will have to put an IA in at some point.
And this, I know I've been working with you guys, I've been following this whole IA discussion since before, when it was being handled by the Board of Health, and I was following it there and had some discussions with Scott McGann about it. And he's saying, I think he said something between 150 and 250, like, septic permits a year are issued just in the town of Falmouth for,
That seems like a reasonable number, yeah.
yeah. So that makes a huge impact if we're mandating them in these watersheds that are already impaired to upgrade to an IA system.
Right. I keep away from superlative words. All 150 are not in impaired watersheds.
No, they're not, no, but I'm
And-
just saying
and-
is,
And if there's
that's a huge
5,000
amount of
if there's
septic
5,000
systems.
homes in an impaired watershed, and there's 20 permits a year, it's gonna take a long time. But I've said twice already that, we're gonna get through the geo-boundaries, then we're gonna establish what the criteria is beyond the geo-boundaries, and clearly, new construction, or as Doug points out, major modifications that are not in the geo-boundary but are in an impaired watershed, we will recommend that they put an IA in. That will happen between now and the first of the year. We'll go to the selectmen with our recommendation, and then we'll go to the Board of Health.
So you're saying anyone in an impaired watershed, and then will have to upgrade to an IA? And then,
If they're developing new property
yeah,
or substantially upgrading their home.
that's great news.
If you're an
That's
existing,
great
well,
news.
again, that's a recommendation from our board, presentation to the selectmen, and then adoption by the Board of Health. So there's a couple of steps.
That's great news. I'm
By the
glad
way,
to hear it.
thank you for the segue to West Falmouth Harbor, because that's the next one we're gonna present right now.
Oh, excellent.
And that was not a setup. I didn't ask him to stand up and talk about West Falmouth
Oh,
Harbor.
yes, you did.
Okay, West Falmouth Harbor is a lot less pretty.
It's a conch shell.
So, West Falmouth, there's 878 parcels in the watershed. 608 are single-family residents. Since the finalization of the MEP, there are 56 parcels that have been developed. So, there are a lot of sub-embayments within there, and they all have different issues. So we're gonna look at this watershed as kind of 6 different little watersheds. So these are the 6 sub-embayments and the Buzzards Bay Coalition Health Index score for each of those. So Outer West Falmouth Harbor is good, 73%, versus Mesh Pequot, which is 5%, which is poor. Using the same sources, but also now considering what the town has done as far as its planning efforts in the CWMP, what has been put in as implementations, what the state has approved, and taking all of that into consideration going forward. But we gotta look at where we came from. So the MEP numbers. These are the numbers that the MEP had for each of the individual sub-embayments. The MEP present load was done prior to the wastewater treatment plant upgrades. And what they did in there, which is a mess, was put the potential upgrades and took it out of the build-out potential. So that's why the build-out potential.
Can you say that again? So
They took, because the physical upgrades were not completed when the MEP analysis was going on, but they were very promising. The nitrogen reduction from the upgrades, the potential for that, the MEP considered that in the build-out number.
What do you mean by the upgrades?
The
Not been upgraded.
changes from spray irrigation and the physical upgrades in the plant to
Oh, the
reduce.
wastewater treatment plant. okay.
In 2005, the ones that were completed in 2005.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I thought you were talking about septics now.
Nope,
I understand.
nope, wastewater treatment plant, so that's why the build-out number is so much less than the present number. It's messy and
I see.
it gets worse.
You're saying that the difference between, for example, for Snug Harbor, 2,000 kilograms
It's because.
present load and 670
Yep,
reflects the change to the
Discharge.
discharge
Yep.
from the plant.
yep.
Yep.
Okay, I got it.
So now the Cape Cod Commission says the present nitrogen reduction requirement is about 2,000 kilograms. And how they have that spread out, they have most of it being in Mashpaqua. I believe, but I am not completely certain, that they are using the fact that the treatment plant has a groundwater discharge permit, and I think they're using it at 10 milligrams per liter and not the actual performance or the permit, the current permit itself, because the last data from there is 2016. But that's what Cape Cod Commission says. When GHD did the analyses for what those treatment plant upgrades equated to, they came up with a nitrogen reduction just from those upgrades of 8,145 kilograms. So the three sub-embayments that have direct inputs from the discharge are the Inner Harbor, Snug Harbor, and Mashpaqua Creek. That's what the MEP says. So this is the MVP, this is their map of the sub-watersheds, and what they're saying, how close each of these is to meeting their TMDL. This is some of Buzzards Bay Coalition snapshot. Again, this is what I had on that early slide of the health rating for it. So here's an example of one of the sub-embayments that has direct input from the treatment plant discharge versus Harbor Head, which doesn't. So you can see the long-term overall health of those specific sub-embayments. They're very different. They're also in very different parts of the watershed. Okay, so back to the same way we've been doing this with the water use. The MEP water use versus MVP water use. So to put it back in MEP, we're using the 126 gallons per day. So that means an average single-family home in that watershed that upgrades to a 10 milligram per liter Title V removes about 2.5 kilograms of nitrogen per year. What I did here for the present MEP load was I took out the GHD 8,145 kilograms from the three watersheds that had direct inputs. So I'm looking at the three that didn't. So this is the number of single-family residents that would need to be upgraded for those three specific sub-embayments. That GHD estimate, there's still another 200 kilograms that comes out from the system. So that will have, all of it will have an effect in other areas, but looking at what's actually in those individual sub-embayments, that's what this is trying to do. The last list I got from the county of where the existing IAs are in that watershed, I think that was including systems from early 2023. This is the breakdown of where they are. All of those systems I counted as 19 milligrams per liter, so they all remove about 1.1 kilogram of nitrogen per year. So all of that's taken into consideration. So if you look at what the MVP says, that 2,000, the numbers are a lot higher. This little line down here, if all of that discharge goes to an outfall, what GHD says is there's 1,868 kilograms left. A lot of that would come out of Mashpaqua and Snug Harbor. So you would meet most of what the MVP says still needs to be removed. So I threw this in here because I keep talking about what MVP says. So their database has individual points for every parcel in there. And it gives information like existing water use, the projected future water use. It then calculates the septic load based on the standard practices. It has a fertilizer and a stormwater load, depending what's on that lot. And it comes out with a full septic load. It also tells you what watershed it's in. So the wastewater treatment facility, back to why there's still 1,300 in Mashpaqua, has basically two database points, one in Mashpaqua Creek and one in Snug Harbor. So that's arbitrarily decided. I don't know how they picked the location of their points because it's not necessarily where the septic system leach field is. But they're basically saying everything from here, whether it's actually discharged here, is going into Mashpaqua. So those numbers have to kind of be taken with a grain of salt from the commission. For the geoboundaries, so for those three that have the direct wastewater inputs from the treatment plant, and even through the CWMP process, state said, we declare West Falmouth has had enough nitrogen removed that you've met it. We know that's not the case yet. For those three, I did the similar thing to what I did in Quistit, was the direct abutters for those three sub-embayments. For the ones where there's not a direct influence from the wastewater discharge, I actually calculated the geoboundary of what you need to get to. So the outer harbor, you didn't need much. Harbor Head and Oyster Pond, it's almost the entire sub-embayment. There's maybe two developed parcels in Harbor Head, and I think 4 in Oyster Pond. So it's almost the entirety of those sub-embayments. When you look at the numbers, so I broke this out. This table on the upper left are the MEP numbers. So those are the regulatory numbers using the MEP averages and what you're getting to with those geoboundaries. Down here, this is the MVP numbers using all of the water use for all of the parcels. So looking at the single-family residents that are in that geoboundary, the existing IAs that are in that geoboundary, and what your total nitrogen reduction is. So it would be 535 still needed from MEP. The geoboundary gets you 443, but then there's still that 200 excess from the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, according to GHD, as far as tangible nitrogen removal. That 200 is also included down here. The attenuation by Mashpaqua Creek for any parcels that are in the geoboundary was also considered there. So, was that a question?
So, yeah, the big caveat to this is the assumption that we are going to be able to permit an outfall.
For this number.
Yeah.
There's
some other, when, as we do, be very clear that that's a big.
These numbers don't rely on an outfall. So
okay.
these numbers, GHD already said it's X number of reduction. So they're still loading from the beds, and that's included.
Okay.
So PRB keeps coming up as an idea for West Falmouth. So Harbor Head and Oyster Pond were the two biggest areas. So something to consider would be a potential PRB along West Falmouth Highway. You may be able to reduce the amount of IAs upstream. These already all have IAs here. Again, there's very minimal parcels, developed parcels up here. I don't recall what year, but CDM Smith did an evaluation, a PRB evaluation for quite a few locations in town, and one of their actual recommended sites was a 450-foot section along Nashawina Street. During their evaluation, and it was a thorough evaluation, they claimed that the majority of the nitrogen from the discharge is coming in Snug Harbor and not Mashpaqua Creek. So that's part of why that's the location that was selected there. The DEP underground injection control, they prefer at least 50 feet from surface water boundary to do an EVO PRB. They would like it to be more, but you do have that distance from the surface water in there. The way the geo-boundary is done, because in theory enough nitrogen has been removed, once the plume washes out, it doesn't actually reduce the need for any IAs in that geo-boundary. So that's just some other things to throw out.
Can you show us where the bike path is on that?
This is the bike path right here.
Yeah.
So the bike path, I thought the bike path looked like a good place, but in the CDM Smith evaluation, it actually says that there is a leasing restriction that only transportation-related activities can occur on the bike path. So that's a whole different thing to explore.
It's under the bike path if you put a PRB.
Transport of nitrogen molecules?
Well,
Good point, Steve.
So, because that was something that,
It's a good point, though. It's not the bike path itself that is being altered, it's the subsurface. Look, that's a lawyer thing. We can go talk to them.
For now, let's let, if we go down this path, it's a thing to look at.
Right.
One of the exercises, if I can ask you to do it, is make your best estimate for what it would cost to put a PRB in, where you're showing it, okay?
what, this one right
No,
here?
the other one, the one down below.
This one?
Yeah. And then-
4.1. No, 5.9 for that length is my best estimate.
Did I miss that?
Yep.
But Steve, I think that the area, the Snug Harbor is where you really need to put it.
Yeah, but I was going down a slightly different path, Moment
Well,
Road.
Snug Harbor or the creek? The creek is really where it gets hammered.
You know, we've made a lot of well measurements, and Snug Harbor is the focus of the nitrogen. And well 19 shows that clearly, too.
Why not do both?
Well, look, it's just money.
I want to circle back, the money side of it, I want to circle back to the money side if I can. I now picked up that you put the 45,000 in there. There's a cost, that the homeowners aren't going to be paying for the PRB.
That's right.
The town's going to pay for the PRB. And the offset cost is what we might give for a subsidy for the people that would be putting the IA in, right? Not the cost of the IA, but the subsidy we would be giving them. So the question then becomes, does the town want to relieve a certain group of homeowners from putting an IA in to put a PRB in? Is this-
But there's another, the nitrogen coming in to Snug Harbor does not come from those homeowners. It comes from all the Seward areas in town that were
That's what I was gonna say.
diverted to, the wastewater plant.
Exactly.
I didn't focus on the Snug Harbor one right away because it's so short. I focused on the
It's
one down
short,
below.
but man, that is where the nitrogen is.
That may be a perfect spot for a PRB. Maybe
If
adjust.
there was ever one,
Okay.
I think you'd need to do some more geoprospecting to know exactly, but if there was ever one that could really pay for it, be cost effective, especially because some of the more recent work we've been doing suggests it's still, it could be well more than a decade before all this water
Yep.
clears out.
Okay, Ed?
I was gonna give some more info on this under members' report, but I think it's appropriate to do it now. I've talked about it last couple of meetings that I'm appalled at what's gone on in Snug Harbor. And, I've been there and spent a number of hours just looking at conditions. I have reached out to Paul Dombrowski from Isotech. He's looking at the report that Corinne was kind enough to furnish to me that was done 10 years ago by CDM about potential PRB sites within the town. And Snug Harbor was in particular mentioned in there, and there were some concerns they had about the conditions and the flow of the groundwater there. Paul is looking at that. He's doing a new analysis and he expects to be back discussing it with me by the end of the month. With the current technologies and with the current data, what might make sense? And yeah, the bike path seems to be a nice, easier way to do something than right at the harbor or across Noshawena Street. I had a discussion with Jen Lincoln at Concom about what would be your concerns for a PRB, and it's pretty minimal. It's basically an idea that there's some significant oxygen depletion with a PRB, so that the groundwater might not have enough oxygen to support fish life, and that was why they weren't in favor of one along the Coonamessett. But, you know, that's something for the scientists that do the PRB stuff. Paul said, you know, now they're finding good success. Instead of EVO, which has some issues and needs replenishment relatively frequently, doing large diameter boreholes and filling them with wood chips and stagger them so that it intercepts the stuff. And, you know, so this is something I've been actively looking at, because Snug Harbor is an embarrassment to this town and a crime what we've done to it. And the data that's being studied right now shows there's some really fast flow of significant nitrogen into Snug Harbor particularly. And if I just look at the physical conditions at Massapequa Creek, that water's pretty damn clean in there, but the harbor looks like an open sewer.
Yeah, but
So
you-
anyway,
you-
this is an
the
active
third-
program.
This is the third time you've given this speech a little bit.
I know it.
Okay, so here's where we're at. Between you and the gentleman to your right, put together something that we can take to the selectmen as a recommendation to request funding at a town meeting to do a PRB at this location, okay? Bring it back in here, and make a presentation to this committee of what it is and the value of it, and if we all vote for it, we'll take it to the selectmen as a recommendation, and then we can go look for money,
Yep.
okay?
That's where I'd like to go.
That's where we're at,
Yep.
okay?
Yep.
It looks like not a big PRB, looks like a great location. Let's not talk about it, let's put together something that says we want this much money for engineering and construction. Okay,
Yep. It's coming.
good. Steve,
So I should take us down.
4 things.
Large
They're
diameter
short, though.
boreholes.
The first one is in connection with this. Ed, are you listening? The PRB calculation, fall into the trap thinking that it's just taking the nitrogen from the bright blue area upstream of it. It's taking nitrogen from the entire watershed upstream of it.
Right.
And potentially, it's saving putting IAs, again, not just in the bright blue area upstream of it, but also in the bright blue area downstream of it. Because if you take out enough with the PRB, it may be that, I don't know, you have to do the numbers, but in principle, you could still allow the people downstream of it to use regular septic, because you'd been removing so much of the upstream nitrogen. But we're not discussing that now, but I mean,
Yeah, that's not the reason for
Three.
the exercise.
Three.
three more quick ones.
yeah, no, you say you have 4, so you go ahead,
Yeah,
Joe.
yeah. When people, when you talk about the older existing IAs, the 19 milligram ones, are you assuming that, are we going to require people who have those, especially in a geo-boundary area, to upgrade?
That's a conversation again back under the triggers.
Under my calculations, no, I kept
She
them
did-
at
she-
19.
no, she used them
It's just
at the
an
19.
issue to think about.
Yep.
Do we know anything about the lateral accuracy of the watershed boundaries?
Again, I think that's back to what they're saying, that there's some more geo work to be done to determine that a PRB here is the right location.
But I mean, not just for PRBs, also even,
No,
even
no,
for
we-
IAs.
we have not considered taking on, doing a validation check on all of the watershed boundaries created by MEP and the county.
Okay. And we're still waiting for the plume from the wastewater treatment facility to end, correct?
Yes.
And no one is willing to predict a date for that, is that correct?
You can make lots of predictions.
I think, you know, I don't want to use up any more time on this, but Amy has come before us before with data from the observation wells between the treatment plant and wherever, and we've had conversations before about travel times and where we should expect to be seeing numbers, and whether or not it's conforming to the predictive models. And Amy, if I'm going to put words in your mouth, but my sense from everything I've heard before is that it's doing what we think it should be doing, right? Gotta take,
Marnwell 19. Marnwell 19 is in that, basically right at Mashawina Street, where the yellow line is, the smallest yellow line. And that well is below 3 milligrams per liter now, and it has been for a while. So it, we have that, the nitrogen from the plume, from the wastewater treatment plant that stopped discharging in 2005, I believe has washed through that point, but it is a complex picture.
I'm gonna touch this momentarily. So here's the wastewater plant up here with their beds. And now this water gets to the groundwater and starts traveling this way. It rains and water sits on top of it. It rains and water sits on top of it, such that the plume is not uniform through the depth of the groundwater. It gets pushed down. And last time I looked at some of the stuff, or you showed me some of the stuff, the wastewater plume is actually going under a portion of West Falmouth Harbor and then surfacing
In the
Okay.
harbor or on the outside?
on the outside because it gets pushed down. So the surface water, the top of the groundwater, is measuring 3 right there. Okay?
So
Amy
Marnwell
said
19,
in a
Marnwell
well.
19 is a really deep well. And as you're saying, the rainwater does drive,
Drives the plume down.
well, I guess over time and over distance, the plume does go deeper. And so that is one of the issues with a PRB, to try to capture any nitrogen coming from the wastewater treatment plant. Nitrogen coming from the wastewater treatment plant comes really deep, but then a lot of it does come back up and has been coming back up at the boundary of West Falmouth Harbor. So it's complex.
I'm cognizant of 6:30, so if we've got hard substantive things, I'll entertain them.
No.
Okay?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So the whole conversation just underscores the reason why we need the outfall, because it is a very complex groundwater picture for West Falmouth, and the outfall does certainly at least turn the faucet off of that permanently.
Yes,
Amen.
that's the plan.
Yeah?
Matt Hanley from West Falmouth. My property actually abuts the waste treatment plant. That's one of the reasons I've been following this subject since 2009. And I really appreciate the work that this board's doing, really taking a hard look at all of Falmouth and all its estuaries. This is a very complex issue, and from following this issue for so long, I can speak for that. One thing I'd like to say, just a little bit of input, because I am familiar with West Falmouth Harbor and its sub watersheds, is that this town might get its most bang for the buck, putting a permanent reactive barrier closer to the waste treatment facility. You know, we have a couple full cross sections, like you have Route 28, the highway, which is right at the waste treatment facility. And if you look at, if I could get you to go back to the watersheds in the first slide, you'll see that these watersheds fan out as they get closer and closer to our salt pond estuaries. And if we use the highway, we could have a shorter piece of permeable reactive barrier closer to the source and not have to worry about the legal ramifications of having it too close to bodies of water with the deoxygenation. So we have the highway that's directly besides the waste treatment facility, everything down, the houses down there's bigger parcels in Snug Harbor and Mashapita Creek. So there's not as many nitrogen to get gained from those homes being IA systems. The biggest bang for our buck is gonna be putting the barrier close as we can to the waste treatment before it fans out as it gets closer to Snug Harbor and Mashaputta Creek. The other concern is any additional discharge put at beds 14 and 15 is gonna go by GHD's particle tracking data says that 50% of that's gonna go back into Mashaput, I can't pronounce the Mashaput Creek. So, you know, I don't envy the job you guys have in front of you. I do also, from being on the executive board of Surfrider Foundation, we also are, you know, supporting an outfall pipe. I think it's the best solution for all of Falmouth, all the estuaries, and especially for West Falmouth. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. Close the discussion on West Falmouth?
Yes.
Okay. So the next item is reports of members and staff. If there's something pressing, I'll
I'd like
entertain
to
it.
say something, but I need the lectern to,
Please.
I'd like to show a couple of quick pictures, I think.
While he's showing pictures, I've been meeting with the Board of Health. We had about a 45-minute discussion at their last meeting. We're working on upgrading their home rule regs. And as things get finalized, I'll bring it to you.
Terrific.
Tom Lefty's down at this
Any other reports while they're working on the audit?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't have one.
I was just gonna say, I met with Earl and Hilda of the Green Center. They invited me to come out and take a tour of their urine diversion facilities. And it was really worthwhile for me to get a sort of a hands-on view of what their systems look like and discuss with them some of the challenges they're facing in progressing their pilot study.
Excellent. Excellent. Tom, you're on.
All right, thanks. Yeah, the last meeting, comments from Amy and from Steve Rafferty about where the outfall was led to a little bit of confusion, I think. This is the ruling from something that used to be called the United States Geographic Board from 1916, when it still wasn't resolved, okay? I rolled over a few very large rocks at low tide and found this item, and it defines Vineyard Sound as stretching from the Elizabeth Islands to a line running to Succonesset Point to East Chop, okay? And then if you go, how do I get out of this one? Top right corner. Here, there we go. If we go to NOAA's, and I don't have a really good chart, on the NOAA chart, Vineyard Sound sort of sneaks over here around West Chop, and then everything over here is Nantucket Sound. And you raised the issue of some concerns about the assimilative capacity of the receiving waters for the outfall, right? When we were talking about whether we were gonna be
I
possible.
wasn't concerned about it, I was concerned about defining.
Right,
The definition issue.
yeah, so obviously, if we're using Nantucket Sound as the receiving body, that goes all the way to Chatham, and you got an enormous body of water. So it's gonna have less chance of having an effect if it's limited to NOAA's definition of Vineyard Sound, which is that little skinny bit of
I
water.
don't think the computers that run the math models of the flow take into account the political names of the bodies of
Yeah.
water.
Can we just call it
The ocean.
the sound?
Well, no, I'm just throwing this out that I would like for the agencies, whether it's the state, I think it's finally gonna make the decision as to whether or not we're gonna have any impact on the assimilative capacity of the body of water to decide, are we talking about Nantucket Sound in its entirety? Right, you said before they were no longer calling the outfall Vineyard Sound, they were saying it's a Nantucket Sound, right? Was that correct?
We're saying that. We've looked at a lot of this same stuff. There are many conflicting
Right.
decisions and conflicting indications.
Well, one thing I found out in this study is for a long time, there was no such a thing as Nantucket Sound. It was Nantucket Shoals. And Vineyard Sound was sort of considered all the water out there. But anyway, I just throw this out.
30 seconds, Tom.
Yeah, so, anyway, I've got too much time on my hands, I guess.
No, it's good.
Yes.
Anyway,
All right,
I just was gonna try to make sure that when we sit down and decide what the receiving body is, that there's some kind of agreement on the definitions or the boundaries of that receiving body of water. No more questions or comments, right?
thank you. Has everybody read the minutes?
Yeah, I move they be accepted
Wait,
as.
wait, wait, let me get some head nodding. I don't want to get out of here. Has everybody read the minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Does anybody have any comments on the minutes?
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay.
need,
All right, so there we go. Amy, this is for you. So this is the sort from up through 800, whatever, and this is what people paid.
Okay, thank you.
Comment on the
Yeah,
minutes? Yes. At the bottom of page 1 is a statement that says, the state is providing a 60% betterment. They are providing a 60% tax credit, not a
That's right.
betterment.
That's right.
And it is for 4 years at 60% of the cost. Not 3.
Correct.
Just technical point.
No, it's an important point, actually.
Okay? Anybody, other comments? All right, make your motion, Steve.
I move that they be accepted with that change,
No, with that change.
with that change.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of accepting the minutes with the changes noted, signify by saying aye. Oh,
no, wait, there was a question about Amy's comment before, under the reports of members and staff. It says in the minutes that Amy stated that the nitrogen loading from an outfall would exceed the model assimilative capacity of sound, which is not gonna happen. I mean, there's no way.
with all due respect for you trying to straighten these out, the certain regulatory people have already sort of fed back to GHD that this is what's happening, and we gotta do this.
So wait a minute, their stuff, I mean, that it does exceed the assimilatory?
No,
It
no.
can't, so
no.
this is an error. That's my point, I'm trying to correct it.
It's not, it's what Amy stated.
I don't think she did.
Okay, I will,
Follow up on that, but
no,
anyway.
no, 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 we can review these minutes at our next meeting.
Right, I'm almost suggesting
Yeah,
that we don't
yep.
table the minutes till
Yep.
the next meeting,
Yep,
partly because we've already run
Yep.
over by 2.3 minutes.
yeah, I'm gonna be sitting down with Amy.
I withdraw my
later this week.
motion,
Yeah.
make a new motion to table the minutes to the next
Okay.
meeting.
Second?
Yes.
There's a motion
I saw
to
that line, I didn't understand.
table the
I
minutes
don't think it
until the
does
next meeting
exceed, or else we
to
would be
resolve
proceeding.
the issue of
Okay,
vineyard
I just-
sound,
I read that and I said, that's not.
Nantucket sound, and assimilative capacity of large bodies of water. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Everybody did a good job of getting through a lot of stuff tonight, thank you.
And I apologize for going back to 1916, but it was just such a beautiful little pearl.